Okay, second half of chapter 4 this time. We're at the top of page 430, right at the top of page 30. This is only a really short section. You might wonder why I'm doing this in such little sections. It's because YouTube prefers footage less than 10 minutes, so it has to be fairly short. That's why I'm breaking the chapters up a little bit. So this is the second half of chapter 4, starting at the top of page 30. In the end, he sat with the anorak pulled up, brushed his hands and took it, almost crying in frustration and agony. There was nothing left to do, and when the sun was fully up and heating him directly, bringing steam off his wet clothes and bathing him with warmth, the mosquitoes and flies disappeared. Almost that suddenly. One minute he was sitting in the middle of a swarm, the next they were gone, and the sun was on him. Vampires, he thought. Apparently they didn't like the deep of night, perhaps because it was too cool and they couldn't take the direct sunlight. But in that grey time in the morning, when it began to get warm and before the sun was full up and hot, he couldn't believe them. Never, in all the reading, in the films he had watched on television about the outdoors, never once had they mentioned the mosquitoes or flies. All they ever showed on the nature programs was beautiful scenery or animals jumping around having a good time. Nobody ever mentioned mosquitoes and flies. Ugh! He pulled himself up to stand against the tree and stretched, bringing new aches and pains. His back muscles might have been hurt as well. They almost seemed to tear when he stretched, and while the pain in his forehead seemed to be abating somewhat, just trying to stand made him weak enough to nearly collapse. The backs of his hands were puffy, and his eyes were almost swollen shut from the mosquitoes, and he saw everything through a narrow squint. Not that there was much to see, he thought, scratching the bites. In front of him lay the lake, blue and deep. He had a sudden picture of the plane, sunk in the lake, down and down in the blue with the pilot's body still strapped in the seat, his hair waving. He shook his head. More pain. That wasn't something to think about. He looked at his surroundings again. The lake stretched out slightly below him. He was at the base of the L, looking up at the long part with the short part out to his right. In the morning light and calm, the water was absolutely, perfectly still. He could see the reflections of the trees at the other end of the lake. Upside down in the water they seemed almost like another forest, an upside-down forest, to match the real one. As he watched, a large bird, he thought it looked like a crow, but it seemed larger, flew from the top, real forest, and the reflection bird matched, both flying out over the water. Everything was green, so green it went into him. The forest was largely made up of pines and spruce, with clumps of some low brush smeared here and there, and thick grass, and some other kind of very small brush all over. He couldn't identify most of it, except the evergreens and some leafy trees he thought might be aspen. He'd seen pictures of aspen in the mountains on television. The country around the lake was moderately hilly, but the hills were small, almost hummocks, and there were very few rocks except to his left. There lay a rocky ridge that stuck out overlooking the lake, about 20 feet high. If the plane had come down a little to the left, it would have hit the rocks and never made the lake. He would have been smashed. Destroyed, the word came. I would have been destroyed, and torn and smashed, driven into the rocks and destroyed. Luck, he thought. I have luck. I had good luck there, but he knew he was wrong. If he had had good luck, his parents wouldn't have divorced because of the secret, and he wouldn't have been flying with a pilot who had a heart attack, and he wouldn't be here where he had to have good luck to keep from being destroyed. If you keep walking back from good luck, he thought, you'll come back to good luck. He shook his head again, wincing. Another thing not to think about. The rocky ridge was rounded and seemed to be of some kind of sandstone, with bits of darker stone layered and stuck into it. Directly across the lake from it, at the inside corner of the L, was a mound of sticks and mud rising up out of the water, a good 8 or 10 feet. At first, Brian couldn't place it, but knew that he somehow knew what it was, had seen it in films. Then a small brown head popped to the surface of the water near the mound and began swimming off down the short leg of the L, leaving a V of ripples behind. And he remembered where he'd seen it. It was a beaver house, called a beaver lodge in a feature film he'd seen on television. A fish jumped, not a large fish, but it made a big splash near the beaver. As if by a signal, there were suddenly little plops all over the sides of the lake, along the shore as the fish began jumping. Hundreds of them, jumping and slapping the water. Brian watched them for a time, still in a half daze, still not thinking well. The scenery was very pretty, he thought, and there were new things to look at, but it was all a green and grey blur. He was used to the grey and black of the city, the sounds of the city, traffic, people talking, sounds all the time, the hum and the whine of the city. Here, at first, it was silent, or he thought it was silent, but when he started to listen, really listen, he heard thousands of things. Hisses and blurts, small sounds, birds singing, hum of insects, splashes from the fish jumping. There was great noise here, but a noise he did not know, and the colours were new to him, and the colours and noise mixed in his mind to make a green blur that he could hear. Here is a hissing pulse sound, and he was still tired, so awfully tired, and standing had taken a lot of energy somehow, had drained him. He supposed he was still in some kind of shock from the crash, and there was still the pain, the dizziness, the strange feeling. He found another tree, a tall pine with no branches until the top, and sat with his back against it, looking down on the lake, with the sun warming him. And in a few moments he scrunched down and was asleep again. That's the end of chapter 4, and we're at the bottom of page 33. Stand by for page 34.